either that you are serving abroad in the military or perhaps in the diplomatic service, or that you are physically unable to vote, which will probably require some sort of medical certification that you are unable to get down to the polling station. But just being away on a trip, or just preferring to vote by post because it's easier for you, don't want to go down to the polling station.
So you're disenfranchising people who happen to be on holiday?
Absolutely. No. If people are not around for the day in which the election is happening, they're disenfranchising themselves. If you want to vote,
but they're not. They can vote by post.
If you want to vote in our elections, you need to do it in person. That is a traditional principle. The postal vote is an exception awarded to people who are literally unable to get there.
Danny Kruger is an MP for Reform UK and is leading their preparations for government. Good morning, Danny.
Good morning, Calum.
What problem are you trying to solve here?
Well, there's a number of related problems, all of them, I'm afraid, the consequence of the mass migration that we've had over the last 25 years. It used to be implicit in our constitution that the condition of taking part in democracy is that you understand the voting system, which is based on an individual vote and a secret ballot. You should be unpressured, uncoerced, and you should be a British citizen. But what we've allowed to happen is 2.5 million people from Commonwealth countries who are here on temporary visas to have a vote in our elections. We think that's wrong. We now have a quarter of all votes being cast by post in this country. Again, we think that's excessive, and we should restrict the postal votes just to people who are literally unable to vote in person. And we need to crack down on this phenomenon of coercive family voting, as it's called, in the ballot booth, when people are pressured into or told how to vote by their family elders. All of these things didn't used to be necessary. They were just implicit in the system, but we now need to make them explicit, and that's why we've tabled these amendments.
Some of the language you use to describe such things is perhaps unhelpful, if I may be so bold, Mr. Kruger. You talk about the phenomenon of family voting. What evidence do you have that it is indeed a phenomenon? What proof do you have of that?
Well, I'm afraid we have significant evidence for it. The Gorton and Denton by-election earlier this year, independent observers at polling stations took the unprecedented step of issuing a warning on the night that the count was taking place.
But Greater Manchester Police investigated those allegations and found no evidence.
Well, like I say, we have significant problems here, and the lack of evidence because our current law doesn't enable us to properly police this problem. So that's what we are trying to address. We're empowering presiding officers in voting stations to properly ascertain that there is no family voting going on, that people
but
are
there wasn't a problem to solve. That's the point.
There clearly was. And let me add to that, not just Gorton and Denton, where, as I say, we had these independent observers issuing an unprecedented concern about what they'd seen across that constituency in multiple polling stations. In the local elections in Birmingham this year, we had over 50 incidents reported by local presiding officers. These are not partisan political activists, by the way. These are council employees, independent observers who are charged to ensure the integrity of our electoral system. Over 50 incidents in one local authority area reported, and that is now being investigated. I mean, we've known this for a long time. I mean, back in 2012, the House of Commons Select Committee reported that it was, as they said, childishly simple to defraud the voting system, particularly through postal voting. Nothing has happened in the years since then to improve the integrity of our system, but what has happened is that we've had millions more people coming into this country who, I'm afraid to say, don't all understand or respect the voting system that we have.
It's not true to say that nothing's changed since 2012. We've now got mandatory voter ID specifically to address some of these issues.
Well, that's true. So that's the step. But actually, we are not significantly challenged by the question of voter ID. I mean, that's a helpful thing if people are literally trying to vote in other people's names, and that has happened traditionally, historically. But the bigger problem we have is partly postal voting, as I say, a quarter of all ballots cast by post, and then this problem of coercive behaviour in the polling station itself.
Yeah, help us understand.
Add to which, we just have too many people voting in our elections who are not citizens of our country, and we think that should end.
Help us understand your issue with postal voting and how you would address it. So, if you want if you want fewer people to vote by post, how do you stop that?
Well, what we are doing is insisting that the conditions for a postal vote should be tightened. So if you're in the armed forces and serving abroad, of course you should have a postal vote. That's the group that the postal vote was originally established to support. Or if you're physically unable to vote in person, of course there are many people who fall into that category. But at the moment, people are using the postal vote partly just a means of convenience, but also I'm concerned, and we see evidence of this, large numbers of people voting from the same household by post, that it's simply being done as a means of sort of collective voting, of votes being aggregated in a household.
So practically, Danny, sorry, just let me jump in. Practically, what do you do? Do you say you can't have multiple people from one house registering to vote by post?
You make more strict conditions on eligibility for a postal vote.
So what are the conditions?
Well, this will be determined by regulation following the amendment.
So what's your proposal?
Our proposal is that there should be the Secretary of State should insist that the conditions for postal voting are tightened. So you will need to demonstrate.
But what should those conditions be?
Either that you are serving abroad in the military or perhaps in the diplomatic service, or that you are physically unable to vote, which will probably require some sort of medical certification that you are unable to get down to the polling station. But just being away on a trip, or just preferring to vote by post because it's easier for you, don't want to go down to the polling station.
So you're disenfranchising people who happen to be on holiday?
Absolutely. No. If people are not around for the day in which the election is happening, they're disenfranchising themselves. If you want to vote,
they're not. They can vote by post.
If you want to vote in our elections, you need to do it in person. That is a traditional principle. The postal vote is an exception awarded to people who are literally unable to get there.
So it's only members of the armed forces and those who can medically prove that they are physically unable to get to a polling station who would qualify to vote by post under a Reform UK government.
Well, as I say, the precise terms of the requirement will be set out in regulation, but you describe it accurately. We insist that if you can vote in person, you should do so, unless you have a very good reason not to be able to do, which is either that you are serving your country abroad or that you are physically unable to vote in person.
What about this idea that you want only native languages in the UK to be used on leaflets? First of all, what are those languages? What leafleting would be allowed? What languages would be allowed?
English, Welsh, Gaelic, Cornish, the languages that are native to these islands.
Okay, are those the only ones or are there others?
I expect those are the only ones. Again, there will be regulations setting out the specific terms of the language requirement, but the principle is that we are talking about languages that are native to these islands, and I think I've listed them.
And so help me understand what problem you're trying to solve here, because local councils use non-English information leaflets, for example, to explain the mechanics of voting, how you go about it, how you do it correctly, to people who are legally allowed to vote. Why is that a problem that needs solved?
No, by all means. And in fact, it's helpful for people to have the terms of our electoral system clearly explained to them. We actually want more people to speak English in this country, and it's going to be a part of the package of changes that we'll be bringing forward in due course to support the English language requirement for all British people. But yes, if the council is issuing party political information to explain any council service, any public service, then I understand the value of that. Although in principle, as I say, I think it's much better if more people can speak the language of this country, and we want to ensure that happens. What we're trying to ban here, Calum, is party political campaigning in foreign languages, and the problem we're trying to stop is partly just the fact of our segregated society. It feels outrageous that people are being invited to take part in our democracy who can't even speak the language of this country. How are they meaningfully participating in the election that way? How are they meaningfully understanding what the political issues are if all of their information is being delivered to them in a foreign language? And the related issue and the concern that runs through this is that people are not voting meaningfully in a British election. They're being invited to vote often on issues, sectarian issues, or issues to do with foreign policy unrelated to our country. And we've seen this across the United Kingdom. People standing on platforms about Kashmir or about Gaza. These are not within the remit of the politicians that they're electing, particularly for local government. What we want to do is to ensure that everybody participating in a British election is firstly a British citizen, and second, that they are participating in the same election, that we're all voting together for our representatives who will together make the rules for our country as a whole. What we need to end is this sectarian and often ethnic divisions within our country that are exacerbated by people being allowed to campaign in foreign languages.
Part of the, I suppose, fundamentals of an open and transparent democracy are understanding how political parties and politicians are funded. Does Reform UK subscribe to that as a principle?
Absolutely, yes. It's very important that we carefully police the relationships between money and politics. That's why there is concern about this. It's why we ourselves are concerned about the way that parties are funded. We've got a problem with trade union funding of the Labour Party. But I know what you're getting at, and of course it's right that political donations are properly declared. Reform has always done that. And when it comes to Nigel Farage's personal gift that he received before he was a politician, we are sure that all the rules were properly followed there as well.
And what about the money that came via Richard Tice's companies?
Well, again, all the rules were properly followed. Declarations were appropriately made. If there was any mistake about any paperwork, we'll put our hands up to that. But what we are convinced about is that both Richard and Nigel followed the rules that existed. They took proper legal advice on everything that they did, and any further investigations that are being committed, of course, that are being pursued, of course, we will comply with and support. But the essential principle that political donations must be properly declared is one that we believe we subscribe to and that we have followed.
Danny Kruger, thank you very much for your time. Good to speak to you.
Thank you.